All right, it's another film study. We're back in the flow of things. We had a game. Now we get to break down the defense yesterday. Today we're going to break down the offense. Ken McKusick, how you doing?
Life's good, Josh. How about you?
I'm doing all good down here. Joining us this week is Gabe from the Situation Room. Gabe, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing all good. And the Ravens, let's just jump right into it. The Ravens put out, I guess, good news today as they put out a really large transaction report.
Yes, very extensive now. So they've got 6 different categories of exchanges that they're making on one slide of transactions that they posted to Twitter. And this is so much to unpack. We're going to go through this and take a little bit of time. So Gabe, let's talk our way through this. Or Josh, would you like to lead us through the thing?
I mean, we can start with the activated from IR. So we got Averett and Chris Moore both activated.
Okay, so that's the lone bit of really good news in this whole thing, is that Anthony Averett, who's been out for a while, people have been talking about him being back, but I thought the injury might have been season-ending. And Chris Moore, who's been on for quite a while, valuable special teams player, they maybe even could use him at wide receiver now, are back, and I think that provides the Ravens some much-needed depth.
Yeah, I think Averett in particular is going to be an important addition because Jimmy Smith has been banged up the past few weeks. I think he has a groin issue now, and I think that his potential to not be on the active roster on next Tuesday is very real, and having Averett as a quality backup for him is quite important.
Yeah, that would actually give the Ravens, I think, 5 quality corners if you really talk about it, because I think Devontae Harris played very well. They got good play from Tramon Williams in the slot, especially rushing the quarterback, but also some of the things he did in coverage. And Anthony Averett is another outside corner. The team continues to collect aircraft carriers and be short on slot corners at this point.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, they had guys like Dorsey and Bonds who they thought might potentially fit in there in slot, I think, but they didn't really show themselves very well when they were given the opportunity, and that's why you see someone like Williams. Yeah, that's true. And then you bring in Williams, and he's played pretty well in that role.
Yeah. Okay, so you do, when you play the Steelers, you need 2 slot corners. Against most teams, you only need 1 slot corner, but you do really need a backup. So it's the kind of thing where Humphrey has been doing that role. Really would like to see Humphrey playing primarily on the outside.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. He has been good in the slot, but he's better outside for sure. We've seen Averett at times in the slot, but he's mostly played on the outside as well. So I think it's pretty much going to be Williams in there in an ideal situation, unless you go with Averett as the outside guy across from Peters with Humphrey in the slot as your 3 top corners. We'll have to see how Williams fits in there.
Right. I think he's a backup outside corner at this point, Averett. I think we will see how it fits in, but that would be my guess as to how this plays out. All right. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, so I was going to go next up. We've got, and this is probably the most intriguing on this chart because it's our first time seeing some guys come off the COVID-19 list. So we've got Dobbins, McPhee, McCary, and Skura back right now.
So a couple things I take from this. First of all, great to have some additional offensive line depth back. The offensive line, as we're going to get into a little bit, had a lot of problems in this game. And having 2 linemen who can each give you something and really question about where they play is a positive thing. Pernell McPhee back, huge addition for the defense. He's one of the 4 big names that's still out there with Brandon Williams, Calais Campbell, and Matthew Judon still various cases of IR or COVID-19. I guess they're all technically COVID cases right now. Or did Brandon Williams got activated from COVID, didn't he? He did.
He did. Yeah. He was practicing today.
Right, but he wasn't he one of the contact tracers, not someone with COVID, I believe.
I think you're correct, but the point was that he's already cleared any protocols related to that. So he's down to an injury is what's really holding him out. And unfortunately, we don't have timing on that, as we don't know on any injury, of course.
Right. We never know with injuries, but with COVID, we're also kind of just trying to figure out how this all works because we've been told 10 days, but we know it's not really 10 days because then they got to have some time with trainers to get back out on the field.
Yeah, and Josh, you had some really interesting comments about this in the production meeting, but we start with the point that J.K. Dobbins, 10 days were up on game day, and presumably at 12:30 he could have been activated. Now maybe that meant that he had to start his trainer time on Sunday, or maybe, on Wednesday, or he just wasn't ready to play on Wednesday, which I think most Ravens fans assumed. Would you agree with that, Gabe?
I think so. I think that they didn't really want to push it. You know, he was probably available, but he hadn't practiced. Obviously, he had been on the COVID list with a positive case. Apparently, he was mostly asymptomatic, but I think for the case of someone who hasn't practiced for a while, he's been outside the facility. I think it's best just to kind of not, put him in a situation that wasn't going to be a good situation for anybody really in that game, which we'll talk about later.
Right. Well, here's what I draw from this is that it's not as important for J.K. Dobbins because this game is gone and we can't go back. But J.K. Dobbins is now activated to practice at day 12 because it's 10 to game day plus 2 days now on Friday that he's practicing. If that same logic were followed, then Jackson could play against Dallas. And Josh, you made the point in the production meeting that perhaps those 3 training days actually overlap by a day with the 10 COVID days.
Right. Now, but we also know that even national media and stuff and ESPN were talking about the potential of Dobbins flying to Pittsburgh on game day and stuff. So no one, I think, really knows how this works. And I was looking up the NFL official policy, which says for asymptomatic players, 10 days have to be passed since the initial positive, and you have to have 5 days pass since an initial positive test, and 2 consecutive negative tests are completed separated from 24 hours among each other. Then you need to be approved by the team physician. If you're symptomatic, 10 days have to pass since the first symptoms appear. You have to wait at least 72 hours until the last symptoms occur, and then you need to be approved by the team physician and the NFL chief medical officer.
But there's no 2 consecutive tests separated by 24 hours in that case?
I think if you're symptomatic, they assume you have it and just wait out the 10 days.
No, but they still would.
There's no negative test required if you have symptoms and then they go away.
Interesting. I wonder if the test is just testing for antibodies then, because it must
be something. And again, this is also because they ride that line of it being medical and not wanting to disclose things. So the close contacts can return after a second negative test within 24 hours of the first negative test.
Now, Gabe, I know what's your PhD in, Gabe?
It's in molecular biology, so it's not medicine, but I am pretty familiar with these things.
Okay, that's what I was going to say. Let's let the guy on the show who really knows try and give us his opinion on this, because I would think you're the most informed on this.
Yeah, so it sounds a little strange that there wouldn't be a negative test required for someone who was symptomatic. I think the length of the symptomatic period and the period in which you can actually be contagious is variable. So I think you would have to have a negative test in any case if you've tested positive. And it would make sense that you have to have 2 negative tests, because it's possible that it would be a false negative, especially for somebody who was carrying a large viral load and was symptomatic.
I was just going to ask that. Do they have any way of testing for viral load in a symptomatic person at this point?
That I'm not sure about. I do know that you can test the number of antibodies, like you mentioned, and someone who had a very strong viral load would probably have more of an antibody reaction. So you could look at that and see if there's a higher amount. But I'm not sure if that's something that the NFL is testing for. Okay,
Gabe is a late addition to the guest spot here, and just a terrific addition. You are perfect for this discussion. This is completely by accident this happened, but very happy to have you on, Gabe. Let's keep going with the list here. So Dobbins and McPhee, McCary, Skura all could presumably play for Dallas. They'd be big additions to the Ravens.
Right. All right, then we sent one to the injured reserve list, which was RG3, went to the list today.
It's amazing he's not out for the year, or we didn't hear it based on the really vicious, low roughing the passer that wasn't flagged on the pick 6. But I'm not bitter about that or anything. You probably can tell from.
Oh, we'll get to a few of those items today, I'm sure, when we break down the game.
Yeah, but it's a significant loss for the Ravens. I don't think people should minimize this just because Robert Griffin didn't play well against the Steelers. This is a guy who potentially could have helped them manage a game against Dallas and help them win if the defense again played at a high level.
Right. Yeah, sure. And speaking of other things that could have changed the game, we have signed Luke Wilson to the active roster now.
Yeah, tough play in the end zone. We'll get to that a little bit later. I don't know whether he's actually had used both his practice squad call-ups. This may have been a case where the Ravens feared losing him to another team and activated him because I think he would have likely had a COVID call-up this week. I don't think they used any practice squad call-ups because they had so many applicable COVID cases. So you would have thought that he could have been a call-up. They wouldn't have had to activate him after this game, but now probably some other team has interest and they've decided to make it permanent.
Well, or whether or not they do, we really need tight ends on this team. And
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
a hard process to bring someone in now because of the COVID restrictions if someone gets hurt.
Well, very much so, Josh, but my point is that if you have a free elevation allowed for the guy, maybe they've already
Yes.
planned to use all their elevations, but if you have a free elevation, the Ravens have free COVID elevations beyond that, there wouldn't be a need to activate the guy to the active roster unless somebody else really had interest in him.
Right. And that's also why I was surprised that they signed Des Bryant this
Yes.
past week because we had plenty of COVID spots that they could have toyed with them some more.
Yeah, good point.
All right. We also signed 3 guys to the practice squad, and now I figure out why you're making me read this list, so I have to pronounce these names.
I'll take care of it, Josh.
All right, if you can take them if you want.
Okay, so running back Tommy Bohannon, that's a very minor signing. Obviously, Tyson Williams came off the practice squad, was elevated, and didn't get any playing time in this game. Parker Yeanger is a player we've seen before play right tackle. He actually split time at right guard with Powers in the Week 17 game against the Steelers last year. Didn't play particularly well, but he's a guy who, obviously has some NFL experience. And then defensive tackle Braxton Hoyt. That's a position where the Ravens are very thin. I'm glad they signed another defensive lineman because they're always seeming to be on the very brink of disaster in that group.
Yeah, the defensive tackle position has been really, really decimated this year between Williams being out for a number of games. Campbell obviously has been a huge loss for a number of games. Wolf has been out a few times. Matabike missed 4 games at the beginning of the season. It's just you haven't had the entire roster pretty much the entire year at that position.
Broderick Washington in this last game suffered a concussion, so we don't know if he's going to be back for the next game. So obviously a lot of churning going on there, and the Ravens really need another body very badly.
Yep, and then the final announcement, speaking of bodies, is losing a practice squad player to the injured reserve, which is Sean Calkin.
And Culkin was activated for this game. I thought he did a reasonably good job blocking on the edge in this game. Each of the tight ends did some good blocking in this game. Tomlinson, Wilson, and Culkin each saw time, and I thought that Culkin was one of them who did some decent blocking on the edge in this game.
Yeah, I agree. Calkin, he's not much of a threat in the passing game. I don't know if he was targeted maybe once, but he definitely, he did a decent job, I think, in a pretty tough matchup for him, playing against some of the Steelers linebacker core, which is a pretty good core for them.
Yep. 0 targets for Culkin, by the way, just looked it up. Only Wilson had any targets. He had 2 with no catches.
Yeah.
All right, well, right before we get into this past game, which I feel like it's going to be a lot looking there and then a lot looking forward some more because that's just kind of nature of this shortened week, I want to tell you about MyBookie once again because they're still on board, still supporting film study, so we want you guys to get involved with MyBookie as well. Whether you're a first-time customer or have been playing MyBookie for years, there's no shortage of value to be found in the thousands of game lines, unique prop bets, and contests that they offer every week. Sign up or get reloaded today, find an edge, make your bet, and get paid. Make the right play and sign up over at MyBookie, and when you do, use the promo code RAVENS to get your deposit matched halfway all the way up to $1,000. The terms are simple. If you put in $200, they'll match you with another $100 in your account. If you were already planning to bet this season, this is free betting money. It's winning season at my bookie, so come join in on the fun and win some cash while you're at it. Use that code RAVENS because you get that matching offer, and then they know that you came from Film Study.
All right, great. Take advantage of that 50% offer, please, folks. Okay, well, let's move on. Talk about this game a little bit. And this is one of these games, Gabe, that there just is not a whole lot to discuss on the offense. They only played 49 plays, for starters. What are you going to take, particularly in terms of an analysis of either Griffin or McSorley, in terms of looking forward? Griffin's already hurt. McSorley, if he plays against Dallas, is not going to be a good thing. We know that. What do you take from this game for starters in terms of the depth of analysis you want to even provide for it?
Yeah, you're right. It's really hard to take too much from this game. First of all, there was one practice they had for 10 days leading up to it. So they couldn't really install, right? Yeah, they couldn't really install much of an offensive game plan. Of course, you also had half your starters out. So it's really just a skeleton crew. They're not playing many of their playmakers that you would have out there in a number of positions, and they're playing against a really tough defense. So it's kind of like the worst possible combination of things going together. So, maybe you look at a few players and kind of isolate them and see how they performed and see if there's a role for them as the season progresses. That's pretty much the only thing that I can take out of this game.
Yeah, the Ravens just, in addition to having gotten through the COVID, the Ravens just made it through a 5-game stretch of by far the most difficult of the season. They went 1-4, which is not good because it's a test of mettle against playoff opponents, frankly, and they didn't fare well. Certainly in terms of the loss of the Titans was very disappointing, but just the play in general, losing to the Steelers the first time, disappointing. They needed to do better than what they did here. The good thing is they didn't get blown out in any of these games. Only the Chiefs have blown them out this year, and they've hung in there with everybody. Largely a focus on the defense, but sometimes the offense in games like New England, where they didn't do everything right on defense, wore down a little bit. They still put it together offensively enough to stay in the ballgame.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one thing that you can take away is that they're not a team that's quitting. They go out there every single drive. On defense, they try to put stops. They get the ball back to the offense. On offense, they're definitely, doing everything they can. They're not giving up. They're still trying to put points on the board. And that's something that I think you want to see. Obviously, like you said, the games haven't gone according to plan. They've been in the games at the very end. They've had opportunities, I think, to win almost every one of these games. So it's a little disappointing that they weren't able to make the plays necessary. But I do think that, the fact that they are still hanging around, they're in every one of these games, I think that's a positive thing to you can latch on to moving forward.
Right. And the other thing coming out of these 5 weeks is they played Roethlisberger twice, Rivers during this period, Tannehill, who was very effective in terms of who did. Cam Newton was a guy who the conditions were so sloppy it was difficult to get the pass rush going. But these next 5 games, we should see the Ravens pass rush as good as it can be because they're placing some very poor and non-cohesive December defensive lines from some of the worst teams in the NFL. They don't play anybody with about a DVOA rating over 22nd, I think, 23rd the rest of the year, with the Browns included in that group. By the way, I don't know if you saw this. The Browns have the lowest DVOA in the history of DVOA for teams that are 8-3. They have a negative 9.5% DVOA, which is quite bad for a team that's 8-3 at the time. So, a lot of people, I do look at the Browns and say that's a somewhat scary team in terms of the size of their offense and defensive lines. But in truth, they do not have a lot going for them in terms of positive qualities.
Yeah, as far as the Browns go, they have one player that they've been missing, which is Myles Garrett. He's the guy who you really have to watch out for on their defense. And then they have the 2 running backs who just make plays, and they're hard to bring down, and they have a solid offensive line that blocks for them. So that's really the strength of their team. But if you can, make Mayfield make some mistakes and expose their secondary, I think you can definitely beat them.
Right, it's the offense and defensive line where the Browns won that game pretty decisively in Week 1. They really beat the Ravens in the line versus line play, and somehow they lost the game 38-6, which is a result you almost never see. But it is the thing I fear about the Cleveland Browns. It's not anything. Honestly, the running backs, while above average, I think Hunt has actually been a minor disappointment in terms of what he's provided. Chubb has always been pretty good. He's been hurt a little bit. But the fact of the matter is, if you have an offensive line that good, you really should be able to run the football. And you should be able to do what the Ravens have done the last few years, is do it with a collection of journeymen who can come in and play, you know, whether it's Edwards or Collins or whoever. If you've got a pretty good offensive line, you can run the football no matter what. That's
definitely the case. And, you know, I think they have a pretty good scheme. And one of the things I saw from them, even with a good offensive line, Nick Chubb has something like 4.0 yards after contact. So he's making plays even after, you know, he's getting yards from what the offensive line is blocking for him. He's just been a really, really good player for them. If he hadn't been knocked out for a couple games, I think he might be in the conversation as, you know, leading the NFL in rushing yards right now.
Yeah. Okay, we got a little bit tangential here because the point I was making was the Ravens have 5 games coming up where they ought to be playing lines and quarterbacks. In the case of Cleveland, it's mostly about the quarterback, upon which pressure should be effective, where they've played 5 weeks in a row here, which is being like through a desert for this pass rush in terms of having to come up with modest scheme games that is very unnatural for Martindale. I mean, he's good about moving from game plan to game plan appropriate to the opponent, but he would much prefer to be playing with scheme and giving his island corners better opportunities to make plays off pressure.
Yeah, 100% agreed. I think this season has been somewhat of a deviation from what we'd expect from Martindale. And I think it's been because largely of the teams that they've played and the quarterbacks and the offensive lines that they've been going against. And they haven't had the opportunity to really unleash his kind of chaos that he likes to play, and where I have all these blitzes coming from all over the place. And I think down the stretch, that's definitely something we're going to see more, because in the games where we have seen the Ravens blitz a lot, it's been against the teams with, you know, lower tier quarterbacks, lower tier offensive lines, and it's been really effective.
All right. I think time probably to get to talking about the offense from this game, and I think the one thing that people do want to hear about it is the offensive line play, because that's something that has some significant bearing going forward, while the other elements related to quarterback play do not necessarily. But we'll start with the offensive line play. So I'm going to go through one at a time here. Actually, let's talk about it in general. They had 49 total scored snaps in the game, 3 penalties for 25 yards, 1 false start. That was on Bredesen, 2 offensive holds on Fluker. 2 of the 3 sacks, as I scored it, were charged to the offensive line. One of them was a case where Edwards actually, I think, blocked the wrong guy. Phillips blocked inside. That's normally the tackle's responsibility, and they left T.J. Watt a clear line on the quarterback, which was an unfortunate mistake, but it was what it was. They had 2 other quarterback hits allowed by the offensive line again. I made the point that I think T.J. Watt should have for sure been called for a low roughing the passer hit on the pick 6.
Yeah, if Pernell McPhee got called for that roughing the passer was 2 weeks ago against the Titans, which was not as late as Watt's hit, and it wasn't as low as Watt's hit, but it definitely was not flagged the same way from Watt. So that's just some of those discrepancies that the Ravens have faced this year in the penalties. It seems like they've been targeted for these roughing the passer penalties.
It's just absurd. I'm so upset about it. Now, they called a ticky-tack roughing the passer penalty on Cam Hayward later in the game. Of course, the magnitude of the importance of that play was far, far lower than reversing a pick 6, which is about as big a roughing the passer flag as you can have. So that was, by the way, the first roughing the passer called on a Ravens opponent all season. The Ravens had, previous to this game, been 5-0, and they're now 5-1 or 6-1. Did the Ravens have a roughing the passer on Roethlisberger? They didn't get to him quickly enough, I don't think, to have one in this game. So that was the first call on the Ravens anyway, on the Ravens opponents. Okay, also, only 21 dropbacks. So when we look at this, 3 sacks is bad for 21 dropbacks. 2 additional quarterback hits is bad for 21 dropbacks. I'll touch on 6 additional pressures that were not either of those. Again, very bad for 21 dropbacks. The consistent theme here is that the offensive line did not have a very good game at all. They gave McSorley and Griffin ATS, amazingly, on 7 of 21 plays, but that means on the other 14, they were really converting their pressure opportunities very effectively.
Yeah, I definitely think this was a game that, like I said before, it was not a good situation. Offensive line that's makeshift. You're going against one of the best front fours in the NFL, and you have a backup quarterback who is probably not going to be quite as quick where he needs to go with the ball. And I think all those converge together into a really ugly offensive performance.
In the finance world, a lot of people would be tempted to call this a perfect storm, but the problem is in finance, we've had about 11 perfect storms in the last 20 years. So we don't really want to, I hate using that anymore. I don't know if you run into people who say that. Maybe Jordan would be a guy who works in that field and would tell that a lot. Anyway, let's talk about player by player. Orlando Brown had another solid game. Obviously, he's got a tough speed opponent in Bud Dupree, a little bit smaller guy who would be the kind of player who should give him about as much trouble as any because he challenges him to use his length to push him by the pocket. Brown did a really good job in this game with 12-6 blocks, meaning blocking Dupree around the edge of the pocket without letting him get good pressure. 2 pressures only allowed, which is frankly a hell of a day at left tackle for anybody, including Ronnie Stanley. He missed 5 blocks. The one thing that I keep noticing about his play is that he has a lot of trouble contributing on run plays when he has to go to level 2 and the play is to the offside, where Stanley could usually make something happen, or even when pulling. And they've used a lot of this counter action where they have 2 guys, the left guard and the left tackle, pulling on the same play. And it's been hard for Brown to really make a meaningful block on those. He went 2 for 5 on his pulls.
Yeah, he seems to not really have an idea as to who he's supposed to be blocking. Like he's kind of like on a couple of those plays, he runs through a hole like he's a lead block, and then where do I go? There was one of them where I think he got upended by a defender.
Yes.
He seems
It
like
was
he's
actually a very effective block. That block, by the way, that was on the 40-yard run by Griffin or
Yeah.
39, whatever it was. But
so he
but
took
yeah,
the
I noticed
defender
that.
out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a little humorous. I'm glad that he was able to get up and look healthy after that because I was like, oh no, please not another injury. But overall, I thought he's played a really good job at left tackle, filling in for Stanley. This was another game where he was solid. I think he's been very solid all year, and he's someone that I've been praising in a pretty difficult situation. He's stepped right up.
Yeah, I completely agree. He has been the rock now for this line these last few weeks. That's for certain. Bradley Bozeman had the worst game in over a year. Now he had a very tough assignment with Cam Hayward, but Cam Hayward brings out the worst in the 2 guys that he spent some time going against. Now, as a 3 tech, most of his action is directly him on the left guard on that side. And so Bozeman had that very difficult assignment, gave up 1 1/3 sacks. Bozeman has not given up many sacks, by the way, in the last year, but 1.5 pressures, missed 7 blocks in just 49 snaps. Those are all bad totals. What he did is he went 13 for 17 on pulls. But this is where Bradley Bozeman cannot catch a break. Those 17 times he's pulling, his most frequent pulling assignment was to block TJ Watt on the other side. And Watt has a lot of quickness in addition to being a violent-handed, large guy, but he's a lot of quickness, and he gave Bozeman some trouble in that. But 13 out of 17 on pulls was the good thing you'd pull from Bozeman's game in this case.
Yeah, he's been pretty good, I think, this year. This game was not his best, as you mentioned. He really got beat up by Hayward. He's the guy that he pulls a lot. Like that's what the Ravens use him for. He's basically the linchpin of their offense with like those counters you're talking about, with like the pin and pull kind of offense that they're doing. And he's not the most athletic guard in the world, but he does a pretty good job of it. Unlike Brown, he seems to know how to connect with his target and do a pretty good job of stealing them most times when he gets there. It's probably the biggest contribution that he has in the Ravens offense. He's a decent pass blocker. He's not the best at that. I think this game was definitely an instance where he got handled pretty well. But I think for the most part this season he has played above average as a pass blocker.
Yeah, I agree. He's been very good really since about week 6 of last year, been extremely consistent in terms of his play. And one of the things One of the things that really shows up against a player like Hayward is he's a short-armed guy, Bozeman has, and when he's pulling, it doesn't show up nearly as much. Obviously, he's a huge man coming. It's very hard at speed and at distance for even a lengthy pass rusher to impact first contact the way he can at the line of scrimmage. When he's first contact at the line of scrimmage with a guy like Cam Hayward, who's fairly long-armed, then he's going to be at a significant disadvantage. And both he and a few instances with Tristan Colon-Castillo really showed a short-armed guard or center having trouble. And Hayward has just an unbelievable ability to dictate that first contact, get the other arm over quickly, and all of a sudden he's by it and the lineman doesn't know what's happened.
Yeah, that length of the elite interior defensive lineman is a problem for guards and centers who don't have that length, because it just allows them to extend and really move by them quickly with a quick rip or up and under, and it's something that we saw, Bozeman get beat really quickly in a couple of times, and that led to the sacks right off the snap, probably like less than 2 seconds, and he was beat.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of sack that you just can't really do anything about if you're the quarterback.
All right. So I do want to make this point, is that Bozeman scored an F, graded out to be an F in this game. But his raw score came out to be, let me get my pad here and I'll have this correct, was .63 with after an adjustment. I give him almost the maximum adjustment, .08 of .10. But there's .63. You need a .67 to pass. Why is that important? He's a high F. That's a high F grade. I call that not a fall off the table F game there. And unfortunately, we had a couple of those on the right side we're going to get to in a moment. The big one that everybody wants to talk about, though, is Tristan Colon-Castillo. Playing his first NFL game, had a lot of problems at center with a variety of players, frankly. But so Skura obviously had some problems with the snap. Colon-Castillo was okay. Allowed one penetration, one quarterback hit. He missed 5 blocks. He did have the arm length issue that I mentioned, when we're talking about Bozeman. He gets a low C in his first game. Frankly, as far as my grading system goes, when I've seen centers or first-time offensive linemen perform at that sort of level, it's usually a very good sign. It usually means there's growth that's very much possible from that point, certainly his first pro game. I don't grade him on the curve. I'll just say that if you project from this point, I think there's growth to be had in this player.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why the Ravens have kept him around. They brought him up early in the season off the practice squad to the active roster, likely because they didn't want to lose him. They know that they had someone who they wanted to develop, which they've done with a lot of offensive linemen. They have, he's got good size. I think he's decently athletic. He doesn't look like he's very slow of foot. So I think that he's someone that the Ravens think could potentially be, if not a starter, a high-quality backup for them for several years.
Right, and I think this gives them options after the season. So they're going to have to figure out what they're going to do about Matt Skura. They're going to have to figure out if McCary fits into their plans, and if so, where, because that's still, I think, a question. The one thing I'm a little afraid of is that the Ravens are really, if they get away from Skura and they go to McCary and Colon-Castillo, that's 2 extremely short-armed players. And if you add Ben Bredesen into that group is a group ready to be exploited by length in the middle of that offensive line. And I'm not keen on that. A lot of people accuse me of being too arm length dependent in terms of offensive line analysis, but I'll tell you, you just can't have everybody be short-armed. It's okay to have Bozeman, sitting in there and doing a lot of the pulling for the team if he's among other players who have normal length. It's not okay if everybody on the interior has very short arms.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because there's a lot of really good defensive tackles in the league who are more of these kind of, lengthy guys, like your DeForest Buckners, like the Cam Haywards, Tyson Alualu. There's a number of players like that, and those are really the most disruptive, I think, players in terms of their interior pass rush. And if you have someone who is not going to be able to match up with them in terms of the arm length and be able to lock out and hold them at bay, it's going to be a difficult situation, because they're going to have one-on-ones at times. There's no way to completely remove that. Teams scheme up their guys on the middle to have those situations, and if you can't have somebody who can consistently, or at least most of the time, win those battles as an offensive lineman, it's going to be a problem.
And you mentioned 2 Steelers, and the third Steeler, who has the best length of them all, Stephon Tuitt, was not even active. And so, yeah. Okay, anyway, enough on that. But Castillo, very solid. I would encourage people, don't grade offensive linemen on the curve. Don't say this was a great performance because of A and B and C and D, and he didn't have practice, and he didn't have preseason, and he didn't have any previous game action. It's a good starting point, period, but it wasn't a great game by any means in terms of Colon Castillo. All right, let's move on. Ben Powers. People want to hear about him. Now, Ben Powers, this is only his second full game of NFL action. His first game was marred, pretty good blocking game. Otherwise, it was marred by penalties. This game, I scored him very highly. I need to go back and watch the All-22 again because I saw that other sources have him tagged with a hurry, and I do not. So I looked at it, and I have him scored with 49 plays, 44 blocks with 5 misses, an A. And, if you look at his season so far, all of his downgrades basically, or almost all of them, have come from penalties. He has out only 3.5 pressures in 173 snaps. Nothing worse than that. And I don't see how anybody but him is the right guard. Now, they have a lot of options coming back. They have McCary coming back. They have Skura coming back. Will Holden could come back and Fluker could move inside, or Phillips could move back to the position. I don't think any of those guys has outplayed Powers at this point. I challenge anybody to explain to me why he would not be the right guard going forward.
It's a good question, and it might get back to that question of length you had, because when you have someone like Tyree Phillips, he does have that length, he has that size. He might be considered to be a better pass blocker. I don't think he's a better run blocker than Powers, so that's something that could be considered depending on how the Ravens decide to present themselves as an offensive team in the second half. Do they want to be more power football focused? You probably want to go with Powers. If you're going to be more finesse and passing it more, you might want to consider putting Phillips in there at right guard. But I think that's something that the coaches will take a look at and see who's better in what role. And maybe they'll do something where they do some, someone comes in for a few series and the other one comes in for another next few series.
Yeah, I've been projecting that honestly for these next couple of weeks, is that they have so much mid-level talent, basically C talent in the middle of the offensive line, that they really need to kind of rotate in order to get a better read on what exactly they have. And it may not even be that. It may be that they actually derive a benefit from having rested linemen going against tired defensive linemen as the game goes on. So you may have a benefit there. I will say this, that did not work at right tackle in this game with the exchange between Fluker and Phillips, who was, Fluker was in, then out, then back in, and didn't perform well either time. It's TJ Watt. I'm okay with that. But Phillips was only in for 19 snaps, basically in the middle of this game, and looked terrible. And we'll talk about those two guys really quickly. Fluker, 30 snaps, had 1 pressure, 1 quarterback hit, and 2 holding flags. His hands are just way outside the frame, play after play. Part of that is a function of having some of the longest arms in the entire NFL, 36 3/4 inches. That makes it difficult for him to stay inside the frame. I'm going to say this, it's also not natural for him to be inside the frame. It's not how he dictates contact, and he ends up bear hugging these opposing linemen, making it so easy. And while he was called for 2 holding calls, and I thought one of them was kind of ticky-tack, he was not called for another that was really bad. So they got the right number of holding calls on Fluker in this game, at least I think so. But Fluker's a problem. He's very challenged in terms of where he keeps his hands.
The other thing with Fluker that bothers me is he's what I think someone in the scouting community would call him a waist bender. He doesn't bend in the knees. He doesn't get into that athletic posture, and he leans forward, and that kind of allows him to get out of position a lot of the times and forces him to kind of grasp, I think, with his arms, as opposed to having a centered, balanced position where he can, still, strike with his hands and, provide a block that way, but he doesn't have that natural kind of athletic ability to really stay in that neutral base. And I think that's where a lot of his problems stem from.
That's a great point. And if you look at Calais Campbell on the other side of the ball, he does all sorts of things to get low and stay low. But he's the first to tell you. In fact, there's a great off-season video about this, about how when he has not played well, it's because he gets too high. And he'll try all sorts of things. He'll line up a half a yard or a yard off the ball to try and get a low running start into that offensive lineman where he can dictate that first contact with his extraordinary length. Fluker has that ability. If it's a run play and you want a good run block with a guy who can lean into that block and really move somebody, certainly dictate the contact that will twist somebody and let somebody else take over that block. Fluker is that guy. And that's why I think that they still had hopes that he would be a good guard for this team. But you're right that it's not normal, and when particularly in terms of pass blocking, not bending at the knees is a very bad thing. It's something you need to do regularly as you're getting a solid base.
And one of the things with Fluker that I think is the positive is he's good at what I call drive blocking, where he can just move the guy in front of him. But if he has to actually be mobile, that's where you lose him. He's not good on his feet. He doesn't have good feet, and he has he can move someone directly in front of him, but he's not going to be able to be athletic and find somebody on the move.
Yeah, I agree with that. And in your offensive line play, you need a mix of guys. You need a mix of guys who can actually move people, because the Ravens honestly are fairly short on that, or they have been. If they always need to get a double team to get any kind of movement, that's a bad thing. Okay. And the other thing that I would say is that a lot of the mobility required of Fluker is not really difficult mobility when Jackson is at quarterback. And we talked about this a lot with Orlando Brown last year, but they ask him to down block on the defensive tackle as opposed to trying to pick up a wily defensive end or outside linebacker and then move up not a full level into level 2 to make a block, but often a seal block on that scraping inside linebacker to keep that hole open. Kind of like, I usually talk about the right guard opening the front gate, or the pulling player, helping with that. But Fluker is very, very significant in that operation if the guard is blocking to the inside and not to the outside. So anyway, the Ravens offense is built in a way that he should be able to take advantage of Fluker at tackle on run plays. It's really, I would agree, Fluker on pass plays that's been the really big problem this year.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. I think he's a decent enough run blocker that you can put him out there and still run some positive plays with him. But if you have to drop back 30, 40 times a game, he's going to be a huge liability for you.
All right, let's move on to Phillips, because Tyree Phillips came back, and we were projecting on this show that he was likely, given the large number of COVID in and outs, to be a guy that they would have to use as a backup tackle in this game and not reinstall at guard. I think the fact that Ben Powers played this game over Phillips is probably an indication that he's going to still have the job ahead of Phillips this next week. Now, he has other competition. McCary could come back and take it from him. He has other people he has to beat out for that job, but I think that there's an indication that he's already beaten out Phillips for the job. And I think if the plan was, hey, maybe we've got an offensive tackle who can help us the rest of the year, if Phillips can look good there in practice and maybe play well in a game, I think that plan didn't work out. So I'm not sure exactly where they plan to use Phillips the rest of the year, but I'm thinking it's more likely to be at guard than at tackle.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. When I look at Phillips and just in terms of his body, I think he's a more natural offensive tackle than he is an offensive guard. He has long arms, he has good size. I think he's 6'5", but on the other hand, he doesn't have the feet really to play tackle. And I think that's why the Ravens, when they drafted him as a guard. They announced him as a guard, even though if you looked at most draft websites, he was listed as a tackle. So I think that's why the Ravens...
Before we get started, if growing an e-commerce business is your focus, you'll need a platform that's focused on growth. That's where Klaviyo comes in. Klaviyo is the ultimate e-commerce marketing platform for online brands of all kinds and all sizes. Whether you're just getting started or running a well-known brand, it gives you everything you need to send memorable branded emails, text messages, and more so you can build strong relationships that keep your customers coming back. With flexible automations, powerful insights, and super precise targeting, Klaviyo is a faster way to turn great ideas into great customer experiences. That's why it's trusted by more than 40,000 brands like Living Proof, Huckberry, and 8 Sleep. In fact, on average, Klaviyo customers see a 41% increase in overall revenue within 5 months. Klaviyo scales with you, so you never have to switch. They support everything from garage startups to iconic billion-dollar brands. Want to learn more about how you can grow your brand with Klaviyo? Visit klaviyo.com/grow to get started with a free trial today. That's KLAVIYO.com/grow.
Put him there and started him there from week 1 until he got hurt. it's because he doesn't necessarily have those feet to be able to shuffle and you know be good in pass protection. He's also not a good run blocker. So if you have him at right tackle, you're not really getting any benefit from him there.
Yeah, so you're saying you want him in the phone booth at right guard as a pass blocker, which I'm not going to say that's a completely limited role. That arm length should really help him at right guard in the run blocking game. But if he can only be a good pass blocker, that does limit what he can do within the Ravens' offense.
I think for this year, that's definitely the case. I think moving forward, he might be able to move and improve his run blocking. I think that's a skill that's more of a technique thing and can be learned. But I do think that in the phone booth, like you're talking about, in interior, with his length, with his size, he has a better anchor than some of the other interior Ravens offensive linemen.
All right. Let's move on. Ben Bredesen got 10 snaps in this game, and he only had a handful of snaps before this game, but he made all 10 blocks, looked very good doing it, frankly. 3 blocks in level 2, good mobility, like that. He did have a false start, which basically negated the value of all of that, but it's still this is the kind of game, obviously you wouldn't want a guy who plays 60 snaps and has 6 false starts. You'd know that was a bad game, so you should know that 1 false start in 10 plays, even if you make all 10 blocks, is not acceptable. But it's a performance which certainly has leading indicators that are positive for what he can bring you, at least as a 6th offensive lineman.
Yeah, I thought he acquitted himself really well in that role as kind of that jumbo package offensive lineman, tight end in reality. I thought he moved well. I thought he connected on his blocks well. I think he's someone who could potentially play on the interior if you need him at right guard. I think Powers clearly has the leg up, the foot up on him as of now, but he might be someone who could be given that opportunity at some point because I think he has decent size. Maybe he doesn't have quite the strength being a rookie that someone like Powers, who's been in the league for an extra year, has. He has probably a little more size over Breedson, but overall, I was impressed. I think that there's definitely a role for him in the offense moving forward, especially with the Ravens' lack of tight ends.
Bredesen, first percentile arm length for his. That's bad, folks. That's not 100th percentile for his. We have to explain sometimes, but for his size. So that's really the issue for him. I think his future is eventually at center, but a 6th offensive lineman makes sense. He's also a very smart guy. Now we already had a very smart guy who did not work out in John Urschel, but Bredesen could be a smart guy who actually wants to stay playing football and would be better. So hopefully that'll. He's a player who I think will naturally gravitate to that position over time. We didn't mention on this show Will Holden coming back, but his return now seems more important than ever, given the terrible play at right tackle in this game.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting what the Ravens do at right tackle moving forward, because I think, as we talked about, nobody in this game impressed. I think Makari has looked pretty good at right tackle. He's someone you might be able to start there, but Holden is probably the other player who's done the best job. So I think it's between those two as a starting right tackle moving forward. We've seen Fluker play more than I think anybody would like to see. So maybe he maintains as a starter just because they might like him more as a run blocker. But I do think that if you're going to be looking to protect your quarterback, you want to put either Holden or Makari out there.
Yeah, it's interesting because Fluker has played, I think it's 2.5 good games and 2 separate halves that have been just utterly terrible at right tackle. So when he's been good, he's been very good. When he's been terrible, he's been utterly awful. I'm tempted to blame a lot of this on T.J. Watt. I want to believe that that's the case. He looked terrible in the rain at New England for the snaps he played at right tackle. So bad they had to replace him with McCary in the second half.
Yeah, and that's why I thought maybe Makari would be the guy who has a chance to come back now that he's come off the COVID list. He might be given that first shot at playing right tackle because he looked pretty good in that small sample size. He was offensive tackle in college as well, so he has experience playing outside. And then Holden we also saw play pretty well. So I don't know who's going to be the starter in this week. I think every single week it's offensive line roulette outside of the left side. So it could be a new combination every week moving forward.
Yeah, it's definitely a possibility. I think you're right that it's probably rotational play is probably in their future. Let's move on to quarterback here, and I want to talk a little bit about these guys, but frankly, I don't want to talk a lot about them because they're now I don't think what we can project from McSorley is particularly relevant based on 6 pass attempts. And I don't think what we can project based on Griffin is particularly meaningful given the fact he's now on IR. So, it's just, we're at this point. Watching Griffin play that game, he does not present a credible threat to all areas on the football field. And that's what the Ravens need more than anything is they need to be able to spread out opposing defenses in a way that they still have to play a safety high and not bring everybody down into the box. That they still need to consider those wide receivers as actual targets and not somebody who's just a decoy on every play. And it's too hard for the Ravens to fully block up an 8-man box regularly to get regular offensive gains. You can get occasional gains against an 8-man box, especially if they overplay. It's definitely possible to break through and get a big gain, but it's just hard to continuously do.
Yeah, so I've been hard on Robert Griffin basically since last year because I thought that he didn't look great as the backup for the Ravens. And I was a little surprised that they didn't try to find someone in this offseason to maybe give him, at least a push. Maybe have someone to come in that could actually take over that role potentially. But I think that Griffin was kept in that role because he's a veteran. He's a leader. He's a locker room leader. Maybe as a mentor for Lamar Jackson. But in the end, you need to be able to play the quarterback position, and I don't think that he does that well enough to actually to be a real backup in the NFL. Now, I will also say his running ability in this game is what kept the Ravens in it.
Oh, yeah.
He still has some wheels. He still has the ability to pick up some chunk yardage, and if without that, they were really dead in the water. So we'll give him credit for where credit's due. He was able to, make some big plays with his legs, pick up a few first downs, pick up that one, long chunk play. So, good job on that. But in terms of a passer, it really left a lot to be desired.
Right. Very, very difficult circumstances that we talked about with the pressure being fairly constant. The fairly lame separation for most of the day. Obviously, Bryant had a very ineffective day. We can talk about that a little bit later. But I want to go back to what you said about Griffin as the backup quarterback, because he is kind of the ultimate role player in terms of being whatever voice the Ravens need him to be. He's been a terrific mentor to Jackson. We've said this, but if you've ever seen the guy at the podium, he's one of the most intelligent people you'll ever hear speak. He's clearly a very intelligent guy, very centered in terms of what the team needs him to be. They understands that. And then occasionally he'll go on these segments with the lounge where they're, ask him to reach inside a box or ask him questions about the first album he owned and stuff like that. And he knows exactly how to play that, in terms of sacrificing himself on the altar of dignity and talking about how the Spice Girls album was the first one he ever owned kind of thing. He's a natural clown for the camera when he needs to be. He's a natural, very adroit public speaker, when he needs to be that. And I guarantee you the players respond to that well in the locker room and respond to his mentorship. So from that perspective, there's so many reasons to like who Robert Griffin is as a person and a backup quarterback. I think that maybe speaks more to why they have kept him around.
I 100% agree with that. And, I wouldn't be opposed to keeping him around in some function, maybe not even as a player, but, as some kind of, asset. I'm not sure what he wants to do with the rest of his career, but you could bring him in as a coach, as, assistant quarterback coach, something along those lines. I think that would be a perfect role for him. But I just don't think that he has the necessary skills to be a true backup quarterback. And I think that that's something that we saw, we've seen for years now. It's not something that he's been very good at as a backup or as a starter, frankly, since probably his second season in the NFL.
Well, that's fair enough. And if you're Robert Griffin and your thought was, maybe your scale of confidence in ever becoming a starter again, which, is something he's mentioned, was 30 before this particular game, the combination of the play demonstrated and the injury has got to have him thinking very seriously about the rest of how long the rest of his career may be in the NFL as a quarterback. And he has tremendous amount to add as a coach. I'm in agreement with you. I just don't think he's going to make $10 million again as a quarterback in this league.
Yeah, I think that his role in that position as even a backup is probably very limited at this point.
All right. So what else we have to talk about here? We're talking about McSorley. The big stat, of course, from him is that he threw 6 passes, completed 2 of them, and has the highest passer rating in the entire NFL right now. So thanks to you, Hollywood Brown, for beating Edmonds, I guess it was, on that play for the big play. There's nothing. I didn't see anything from McSorley that I particularly liked as either a runner or a passer, and I'm very afraid of him being the starter going in against Dallas.
Yeah, I'm not sure what he brings to the table aside from maybe some ability. We saw him; he scrambled one pickup before that long touchdown pass that was, basically had the C part in front of him, and he was able to pick up like 12 yards, which was, a nice play. He has some athleticism, but I don't think he's someone who is going to consistently be able to make plays with his legs, even to the extent that Griffin can. He just doesn't have that same speed, I don't think. As a passer, he almost threw an interception. He should have thrown an interception. It was dropped. The touchdown, I think, was a lucky play. Obviously, he did throw the ball probably where it belonged to go. It probably should have been a 15-yard completion, but Brown turned it to a touchdown. So that sometimes you get away with that. But it wasn't by any means a great play, and I think that he's someone who maybe you keep around on the roster to kind of be a gadget guy, but I'm not sure what his future is.
Right. And they've gotten away from this, obviously, but the talk was originally that he'd be a third-string quarterback, special teams player, gadget guy, and this all-purpose utility knife value would be there. The Ravens have too many good gunners at this point to consider McSorley in any way. And at this point, there's no way you'd have him on special teams when he's your number 2 quarterback at this. And, I shudder to say he might be the number 1 quarterback going into that Dallas game if they can't get Lamar activated.
Yeah, that's going to be a rough situation if Jackson is not available, because you really are just limiting yourself to a run-first offense almost completely, I think, because, he might drop back 15, 20 times, but it's not going to be pretty. He'd be lucky to complete, 30% of his passes, I would suggest.
Right. So one thing the Ravens did do in this game a little bit is use max protection. So they had 4 times they did it this game. They did it 5 times last game. I thought that would be something that would really help Jackson in particular with opposing teams playing zone defense, because it doesn't really matter how many men you have in the pattern against zone defense. It's really more relevant against man defense that people get bracketed and then one guy takes out 2 kind of thing in man coverage. But when you have zone coverage, if the guy can find the spot in the zone where the coverage isn't, he can make one catch in the middle of 5 guys. Sometimes you'll see.
Yeah, they haven't really done very many max protects with Jackson, and they've dialed up a couple where they look for some shot plays, and I think for the most part they haven't really worked out this year. But I do think that it's something that you could, find somebody on a shorter route or do like a comeback, maybe even design a kind of a screen out of something like that, or a slow developing screen. I think there's definitely some options to work with, but keeping Jackson clean, I think will allow him to find the right receiver a lot of the time. But unfortunately, there haven't been a lot of opportunities for him to really stand in the pocket cleanly for like he was able to do last year, I think, on a more regular basis.
Yeah, that's true. And max protect will, of course, help the amount of time he has to spend in the pocket. You send 4 against 7. The theory would be that you should have no trouble blocking that up for starters. Hopefully you don't. But additionally, once the play is in motion and Jackson can extend it from 2.5 to 4 or 5 seconds, which can often happen on 7 versus 4 protection schemes, you may be able to get that trickle out play. And you kind of mentioned it with the screenplay, but it's really getting that late release that the zone defense has already collapsed on the couple of receivers in the pattern, or the 3 receivers in the pattern probably, and they then give you a lot of field to work with. And Jackson is particularly good at extending that, and it would be, I think, also particularly good if the spy is drawn to Jackson's side of the field to go back against that. So I think there's all kinds of schematic reasons why it could work. I don't think the Ravens have tried it enough to really know that it won't work yet.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I mean, I would we can probably count on one hand how many times the Ravens have done max protect this year.
Yeah, it was. I can tell you, it's been 5 times and 4 times in these last 2 games. So it's not 0, but they don't use it a lot. It's definitely true. Let's move on a little bit. I want to talk about some scheme things. Well, okay. One more thing about the quarterbacks. One of the things I liked about the end of the half, which I didn't really get talked about, is that the Ravens had 2 plays called in the huddle. They got screwed. There's no doubt about it. The flag should have been thrown. They should have been half the distance. They, should have had an opportunity to huddle up and try a different play. But they had 2 plays called in the huddle because they knew they didn't have a timeout. So the first one was that, I guess the play that got them to the 1 yard was a 3 yard run, was it? Or
yeah, from Hill.
From Hill. And then they piled up and they're all playing Twister at the bottom of the pile with each other to make sure it's hard to untangle that pile. And then they finally get him up and they get the snap off with about 4 seconds left. And they had that tight end fade route called. It's too bad the Steelers were all over it because it looked like it was actually pretty well designed in terms of getting Wilson an opportunity. Also, the ball was not out quite quickly enough.
Yeah, it was unfortunate. I was a little more upset with that play calling because I think you can do it the other way around. I think you can call a pass play there on second down, and then you have more options on their third down play. You can still pass it. You can probably still run it. Probably. Well, you probably don't want to run it on third down, but I don't know. I just think that gives you a better opportunity to definitively get the chance for 3 points. And in the end, it probably doesn't matter if they get that 3 points or not. But I do think not having that ability, even though it was probably incorrectly called by the officials in that situation, you don't necessarily know what's going to happen when you run the ball into the middle of a line with 20 players there. And you have, about 20-some seconds, I think, at that point, 22 seconds maybe, to get 2 plays off. In theory, you should be able to do that. If something goes wrong like it did, then you kind of get screwed. And
right.
It's just a situation where you could have done it differently. Maybe you come away with points there. Maybe you come away with a touchdown. I can't criticize it too badly because I think they should have had a touchdown anyway. If Wilson just holds on to the ball, it is a touchdown. But I still think that there's probably a little bit of room to criticize that play call just because you really put yourself at disadvantage when you don't allow that much time on the clock.
Okay, so 2nd and 1 at the 1 with 26 seconds, just so we have the scenario right. So you could go pass, run, or pass, kick. Those are the 2 obvious ways with no timeouts to try and get that done. You can't take a sack, obviously, but you can go pass, run, or pass, kick. And if you get 2 incompletes, you still have the opportunity to get that in. This is very reminiscent of the Super Bowl. And Marshawn Lynch not being used. The argument goes in the other direction in that case, but it's that interception at the goal line was a strange case in the case of the Patriots in Seattle Super Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, maybe even do something like a bootleg, like a rollout, and you have like an RPO option on it, like something like that, where you have the ability to still maybe get into the end zone with Griffin's feet, but you can also have the ability to pass it or throw it away if it's not there. So that's the kind of thing I would like to see there. You know what? It went down the way it did, and I think that there's a lot of things that can be griped about the way it happened, but in the end, I don't think that's what cost the Ravens the game.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they were outplayed otherwise, so it was what it was. A little bit of scheme stuff, and we want to kind of catch up on the pace here a little bit, so I'm going to go real quickly here. I think they ran the ball out of necessity in this game. Obviously, a very poor pass blocking matchup at several places along the offensive line, at left guard, at center, and at right tackle. They were not in good shape to pass block in this game. And even though Brown had a good game at left tackle, which is normally a spot where you might have some difficulty, they had too many other mismatches along that Pittsburgh front for them to really try much passing. I think they got committed to the run game because of that. I think going into Dallas, I think we'll see that again if the Ravens have McSorley at quarterback.
Yeah, I think they'll kind of have to, like you said, out of necessity. And unlike Pittsburgh, I think Dallas can actually be exploited in the run game. They don't have the same types of players up front that can continuously stuff run plays for 1-0 negative yardage. That's something that really kept the Ravens from having a cohesive offense because they couldn't actually get into, third and short kind of situations where you can run the ball and keep the chains moving. They just didn't have that opportunity. It was third and long all game.
Yeah, completely agree. And Dallas is very weak up front, much weaker than the Ravens have been, even with all their injuries. Still have Ellis and Wolf. That's pretty good defensive players, frankly, in the middle that they can present. The Cowboys are so injured on the inside. They're in a lot worse shape than the Ravens. So the Ravens are not the only team suffering with the December depth right now there. Couple things. Brown, he had the big play that got the Ravens back into the game, but Marquise Brown had 7 targets for 15 yards before the final Ravens offensive play when he got hit for the 70-yard touchdown. Nothing against him. I want to see him do more to be elusive after the catch. I think he benefited from Edmonds being way over-aggressive at a time where there was no reason for it. But I want to see more of that. I want to see more of attempts to make yak plays from Brown as opposed to attempts to not take hits. I think there's a distinction there. I don't want him to take unnecessary big hits, but I do want him to try and take some more elusive moves, even to give up a yard in the hope of investing to make a large yak play.
Yeah, this is something that Jordan and I talked a little bit about in the Situation Room, and we talked about how the Ravens use Hollywood Brown, and they do target him. They try to get him involved in the passing game, and this is a good example of that. They got him on some specific short routes where they tried to get him the ball. The first play of the game, for instance, it was a design play for Brown. He picked up 5 yards, not a bad play on first down. But I think where he kind of is deficient is his ability to run through contact or play through contact, because it seems like he doesn't break tackles. He can be elusive at times and avoid getting tackled, but he's not someone who's going to run through contact. And that's something that you really kind of want from your wide receiver. I think Duvernay, for instance, has that ability to kind of be strong and powerful through the contact. It's not something that Brown really possesses. He has the speed to make players miss in the open field for sure, but he doesn't have that, strength. And I think that's something that we'd like to see him gain as he progresses as a Ravens wide receiver.
Completely agree. I could not. It's extremely well stated. And in a lot of cases, I think getting Brown the football, the guy you want him to be making miss is the last defender, as it was in this case with Terrell Edmonds. He's the last one who had a reasonable shot to get him. After that, it was just him playing off the back of Micah Fitzpatrick down that right sideline. He needs opportunities like that where it's only one defender that he has to make miss to, make a very big play. And that's where these 5-yard plays, they aren't going to ever cut him. The notion that he could ever be a slot receiver is probably flawed for multiple reasons, but one of them is this whole play through contact and breaking tackles component. All right, let's move on here. The tight ends, mentioned real quickly, they badly missed Boyle, Ricard, and Andrews, obviously, in this game. Boyle's, there's no crying over spilled milk at this point, but Ricard and Andrews both on the COVID list. Andrews, they missed him as a PA threat, just for what play action would have done for the running game in this game.
Yeah, absolutely. Not having a viable tight end is a real damper for this offense. And I think it's going to be an issue moving forward next week too, because they're not going to have Andrews back for that game either. So he's someone who's, he's a major cog, not only, like you said, in the play action, but he also will draw a lot of attention on non-play action passes as well, and that allows the other wide receivers to get open. Especially without Boyle, it's just there's just not that threat when you try to show that run. You just don't have the ability to kind of make the defense buy it. So it's going to be tough moving forward without Boyle. Andrews is someone the Ravens are going to have down the stretch, hopefully, but he's going to be missed in the coming week, I think.
Right. So that's obviously a very big loss this next game that they'll have to look forward to and make up for somehow. And it's honestly very difficult to see at this point how that'll be done. Wilson's going to have to play, I think, a big role again in terms of this next game. And honestly, he needs to do more as a receiver. There's one guy I want to talk about in terms of the individual skill position players, and that's Des Bryant. Did not have an effective game, 32 snaps, 2 targets, 0 receptions. He's now, I think, been targeted 7 times this year for 28 yards. And I hate to say it, but that's pretty much exactly what the Ravens should have expected. And I know he didn't have a great opportunity set with what he had to face in terms of Pittsburgh's pressure on the quarterback creating off-target throws for him. But he's also not getting tons of separation here either. And he's not bringing that other element to the game that Boykin brings as a pass blocker. So I looked at this and I'm saying, this is disappointing that Des Bryant is not, if he's going to be used this often, he better get some catches.
Yeah, I think that, sorry, I have an ambulance in my background. I think that he had one route where he slipped on the route and looked like he was actually open for the reception if he hadn't fallen down. So, that's a little unfortunate. And then there was another play where I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. It might have been some underneath route that went to somebody else, but I think he actually beat his guy and it was open deep. And the ball just didn't go his way. But for the most part, you don't see him separating on film. He's not someone who's making a difference when he's out there. He's not out there that frequently, but I think, he might be someone who you can kind of use as a possession guy in certain instances, but I just don't see him being any kind of consistent threat in this offense that the Ravens can count on.
Yeah, Jordan has come out very specifically and said that he doesn't want to hear how good a blocker Boykin is from me. So I had him on the show here recently, and he says this. But I'm telling you, it is a consideration. And if you've got a bunch of receivers who are having trouble catching the football, there's no reason why Des Bryant should be taking snaps away from Boykin, who can block, and Duvernay, who can catch and make something happen after the catch.
Yeah, blocking matters for the Ravens, especially when the way they run the ball with Jackson on the outside. A good block from a wide receiver can turn a 5-yard run into a 20-yard run or a touchdown. It makes a huge difference. And I think that's something that Boykin does exceptionally well, like you've mentioned. And while he doesn't really present himself as a great receiving threat, I do think he could be more involved in the passing game. I don't love the fact that he's not really someone who's going to generate separation and man coverage, but you can use his speed. I think you can use him in certain types of routes, like a comeback, like a hitch. You can get him some quick, 5-10 yard routes and pick up some easy yardage with him. And I don't think that they've really gone to him very often. They tried to at the beginning of the season and kind of just been allergic to passing to him down the stretch.
Mm-hmm. All right. Is there any player you'd like to bring up for individual notes here from this game?
In terms of skill position guys, I do think that Justice Hill showed a few things. Overall, he wasn't greatly exciting. He definitely showed the ability to make players miss. He had a nice catch and run on one play. I think he picked up about 11 yards. That was a nice play. I thought he made a guy miss in the open field. Kind of drug another guy for a couple more yards. And then obviously he had that one long run where he kind of broke like 3 or 4 tackles. It was really impressive. It was a play we talked about as well in the situation room. And I made the comment that I think that play goes for -2 yards if Mark Ingram's given the ball, because Watt was right there in the backfield and Hill just made him miss. And then he showed that burst, he showed that explosiveness, he showed that balance through contact to be able to pick up an additional 5-7 yards after he should have honestly gone down from what was a solid tackle attempt. But I'm not sure if that's something that we can consistently get from him. He really needs to have the ability to get to some type of open space, to use his explosiveness. He does have good short area burst, but I think that he's not someone you can really rely on to be a consistent threat in the run game. And he hasn't really shown enough as a pass catcher yet either. So I think his role is going to be limited moving forward, but I do like some of the things I've seen from him.
Ravens running backs in this game, 17, aside from that 19-yard carry by Hill, had 17 carries for 26 yards in this game. That's not getting it done. Obviously, Gus had 9 for 10. Very tough day in terms of being first contact in the backfield, an awful lot. Hill was honestly similar, except for that 19-yard run. He had 8 for 16 otherwise, so he had a lot of the same difficulty escaping the backfield on some stretch plays. It's obviously very frustrating, and it starts with getting the offensive line healthy again to match up with some of the better defensive lines in the league, and this is obviously the best of the best in that category.
Yeah, it was definitely, a rough day in the offense. In the office, the offensive line didn't do the running backs many favors in this one. I'll leave it at that.
Fair enough. James Prochet has got his 3rd target of the year, and he caught 1, and the other 2 have gone for pick sixes to the Steelers, Spillane and Hayden. So unfortunate set of circumstances there, but the Steelers run a lot of gadget coverages where an outside cornerback jumps an inside route. And they've twice caught Prochet on similar plays. Once with Hayden and once with Spillane, actually an inside linebacker doing the same game.
Yeah, and that's also, I think, on the quarterback, especially this time. It looks like Griffin should have seen that player. It was right in his line of vision. I'm not sure how he missed it, but that's not a throw that should have been made.
Very, very much agree. Josh, what do we have in the mailbag today?
All right, we got an active mailbag today. All right, so we kind of covered this at the beginning, but Minion Hunter is doing the 10 days, 3 days. That puts Lamar at 12. So how do you feel about McSorley starting? You clearly said you don't see it as good. Do you feel better about McSorley than the guy the Broncos put out this past weekend?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right, well, there you go. Slightly better.
A practice squad wide receiver as opposed to a guy who's played a fair amount of preseason quarterback. Yes, I'll take the preseason quarterback.
All right. All right. All these guys that came up, we asked the same question yesterday with the defense. Who stands out on this team? Who was your highlight on the offense of these practice squad guys making their debut?
On the offense, I'm going to pick Ben Powers as the guy I think who made a really good case. And Colon Castillo would be right there with him. Who would you say, Gabe?
I was going to say Colon Castillo. I think, he definitely showed that he has, something there. There's a reason why the Ravens wanted to keep him around.
All right, well, that leads right into the next question about him. And do you think he is the future center for this team? As well as we'll combine it with another question of, are any of these guys the future Ravens?
So I think we covered this a little bit earlier, but the Ravens are going to have a decision coming up this offseason with Matt Skura, who will be a free agent. And they have additional options now. In fact, they have a lot of guys who look like they are fairly natural centers between McCary, Colon Castillo, and Bredesen that I think they wouldn't need to draft one, and they could let Skura go if that was the way they decided to go, provided people look fairly good down the stretch, I'm going to say.
Yeah, I think I would say if I had to put like a percentage on it, I would say Colon Castillo has the highest odds, in my opinion, of being the long-term center for the Ravens out of any of those 3 players.
How about the rest of this year?
I think he will continue playing center for the Ravens this year. That's my guess.
So where do you think the Ravens will put McCary when he comes back?
So I think he'll continue to play either right tackle, or they might move him into right guard because he's been decent at right guard as well.
Okay. I think McCary at right tackle presents a lot of problems in terms of effectively defending an edge rusher, but we'll see.
He does have length issues.
Yeah.
Well, the question is not in the future. It's this week as McCary and Skura both come off this week. All right, now Dirk gets my favorite question of the week because I feel like if my dad had Twitter, this is the question he would
Dirk
send in
Schwenk?
every week. It is.
Okay.
And it's simply, why don't we use more screens?
It's part of it is you need to actually have the ability to set up that screen. But the second part is that when you face zone defense all the time, screens are not going to be as effective. So you throw the ball outside, and sure, you get the lineman out of the play, but all those defensive backs are looking right at the play. The linebackers who are in short area zone are able to get to their spots more regularly. And then, of course, sometimes the defensive end also is not fooled, the edge rusher on that side. And he realizes there's some sort of game being played and immediately, sugs us out of there into the appropriate space to beat the screen pass.
Yeah, I would also say that the Ravens just don't have much athleticism on the offensive line, and that's something that you really look for when you're going to be a team that runs a lot of screen plays because you need that kind of ability to get out in space, find someone to block, and allow the running back or the wide receiver to kind of make some plays. And the Ravens don't necessarily have those guys that are really capable in that extent.
Is it fair to say they're a much better wide receiver screen team than a running back screen team because they have a tight end and a big wide receiver like Boykin who can make very effective blocks, I think, on wide receiver screens.
Yeah, we have seen that a few times this year, and it's been more effective than I think the screens attempts to running backs because we have seen Andrews and Boyle both get out there and screen for Duvernay a couple times. I think he's been pretty effective in that role, and I think we might see a little bit more of that as the season progresses. But I wouldn't expect too much. The Ravens just don't do much screens. It's something that they've lacked for years.
But it's something that Raven fans will always ask for because we get hurt by the screens.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, it's also the Ravens defense because they blitz all the time.
Right. The aggressiveness is why people screen against the Ravens.
And thanks for the question, Dirk. I didn't mean to mention your name in that kind of a sarcastic tone. He's a loyal, longtime listener that we love. Thank you, Dirk.
And it could have been anyone that asked that question. Dirk just happened to ask it this week. It's a regular question. So, all right, Gabe, you hopped on immediately after the game and knocked out the Situation Room this week. What else do you have going on, and what's your Twitter that people can give you a follow?
Yeah, we try to do these Situation Rooms right after the game for the most part. We really want to get it out there and put our stamp on what we think is going on and what happened in the game. So we're really interested in just looking at some of the major plays in the game. Sometimes it's really key plays that turn the game. Sometimes it's just an interesting play that we think is something to look out for moving forward. Sometimes it's a few plays that are in the same kind of mold, something that's new, a new wrinkle that the Ravens put in that we think is interesting. So that's what we want to do. We like Jordan and I, Jordan Co, the co-host, we like to have some banter back and forth. We talk about what happened. We look back on the previous game. We look forward a little bit. But it's just a lot of fun. I'm also on Twitter. I like to talk about the Ravens a lot, at Gabe Fergie, and you can definitely follow me there. And I do write over at Baltimore Sports and Life. I do a preview article before the games. So I write there about twice a month. So I'll be posting those on my Twitter as well.
All right, and you guys have that West Coast advantage, which means it's overnight basically for me when you're recording the show, but it means I get to edit it on Monday morning and get it out there in a typical week. But how did you enjoy some lunchtime Wednesday football this week?
So unfortunately, I was at work and couldn't watch it. I tried to sneak out and listen to it in my car. I didn't have the ability to watch the game until afterwards and watch it when I got home. But I definitely didn't miss too much this time around. So it's not one that I want to go back and watch too much of.
Yeah.
Oh, but you got to get ready for those future ratings.
It's like a preseason game.
Exactly. All right, Ken. Busy weekend. We've got to shift everything as this came out on Saturday. So we've got Know Your Foe coming out
It'll be Sunday.
Yeah,
you know what? Yes. I'm going to allow you to say the dates because I always talk about when we record it, and that's not what's important to people who listen.
No.
So I'm going to say the show, and you're going to say
Sunday.
what day it'll be out.
All right.
So we'll have by the numbers that'll come out the day after Know Your Foe. So what day is that?
That'll be
Monday after Sunday. That's good. Okay, and still in time for a Tuesday game. So hopefully it's tight, but we're going to hopefully give you some good numbers that relate to that. And we'll have an offensive line article that'll come out. I think it'll be out tomorrow. It may not be out till Sunday, but it'll contain the more detailed breakdowns of what we talked about here today. That was the bulk of the show. Appreciate you guys staying through with us. Gabe, you and Jordan are two of my favorite people to talk football with, so make sure you give them a listen on the Situation Room. Tag Gabe at Gabe Fergie on Twitter. with your general questions. You always tag me. That's cool, but tag Gabe also and let him respond to the question. He also is reading my feed, of course, so he'll be able to answer that question. But if you tag him directly, it kind of puts the onus on him to answer that question as well. Also, one thing about Twitter etiquette here is a small thing that I really feel is important is if you're asking a question, I'm happy to respond to it. If you're making a comment, I'm happy to give you a like. But I'm not going to try and respond to every single person who has a specific comment. So if you really are trying to ask me a question, ask a question if you want to do that. How do you feel about that, Gabe? Is that the way you look at it when you...
Yeah, that's a good point because I really enjoy interacting with people on Twitter. You probably have more opportunities to do that than I do, but sometimes you don't know if someone's just fishing for interaction, or sometimes it's something they just want to make a comment. So I think having that question mark really allows you to know do you want to have some discourse back and forth, or are you just trying to make a point? So I think there's definitely a distinguishment there.
All right, so over on Film Study Baltimore, busy week. You also got the articles out, or the offense article is out, or defense article is out. Offense is coming this weekend. So going over there, the situation room, defensive breakdown, offensive breakdown out now. Know your foe, buy the numbers, coming Sunday and Monday. Go subscribe to Section 336 as well, because that'll be there Tuesday morning for you, because the Orioles had a pretty busy week this week, as in cutting salaries and getting even lower.
What do you make of that,
so
of letting Iglesias go?
I don't like it, but it's one of those moves where you're bringing in two young pitchers, which is good. So let's wait and see. Deadspin, which I hate, had a great article today about how the Orioles could spend about another. Right now they're at like $40 million, and they could spend another $30 to $40 million, still be well under $100 million, and have a playoff team.
Well, and $25 million of that is Chris Davis, right? Or $23 million?
Yeah, it's Chris Davis, Alex Cobb, and someone else. Yeah, it's not much. But so I'm interested to see what they do next, because fans want to get excited because we weren't in last place with the COVID year. Mm-hmm. And that's good. That means we should be going up. Every move they made this week goes in the opposite direction. So we'll wait and see. But that's what I'm saying. Lots that Matt and I will talk about on this week's 336. Now's the time to get on board with the Orioles, because we can only go
Here's
up.
my mailbag question for 336 is, you don't have to answer it right now, is Adley Rutschman on the opening day roster next year, or does he come up mid-season, or do they keep him in the minor leagues the entire season? Answer it then.
It's the first time I've heard that question. I think it's the question every week that somehow a conversation has to get into that. So I think he's on the opening day roster, but all the moves this week would tell me no.
Okay.
So we'll see. All right, lots of content for you. Get ready for Tuesday, and we will talk soon.